So you just got done watching the new A24 psychological horror thriller by the name of Heretic, and you want to discuss the deeper meanings, the themes, and of course that ending. Well, you come to the right place. In today's video, I'll be sharing my thoughts about the film and its ambiguous ending, but first share your thoughts and opinions and your interpretation of the film, and what did the ending mean to you? With that said, grab your forks and let's take a bite of this blueberry pie. Let's discuss Heretic, spoilers ahead. Now, I do want to point out now that my thoughts are based on only one viewing experience so far, so I'm sure I'm going to miss some of the big talking points or miss out on some of the more detailed things that you all might have seen, but maybe down the road I might have a part 2 discussing this film a little bit further. Now, before we discuss what actually happens to Sister Paxton at the end of this movie, let's start at the beginning and discuss what happened before that. Heretic tells the story of two young Mormon missionaries, Sister Barnes and Sister Paxton, who are attempting to spread the word about their religion in their small town. Now, after some disappointing interactions with the locals, they focus their attentions on the planned appointment with a man called Mr. Reed at his sprawling house in the middle of nowhere. As they arrive, he welcomes both young women into his house with the promise of blueberry pie made by his wife.
We can't come inside unless another woman is present?
My wife is home. Does that count?
Great.
You like pie?
Yeah.
Now that brings us to our first topic in this breakdown, and that is Facade of Normalcy. Now, Mr. Reed's behavior at first is jovial and inviting, yet every word he utters drips with ulterior motives. The introduction of his false narrative regarding his wife and the bizarre use of the blueberry pie scented candle to feign her presence serves as an early indicator of his manipulation.
Well, ladies, I think it is time.
Time for what?
Time for enlightenment.
This act sets the tone for Reed's elaborate ruse, laying the groundwork for a larger psychological trap. Now, it's important to point out the presence of the butterfly in this scene and the conversation being had. We have Sister Paxton's statements about when she dies, she hopes to come back as a butterfly, and we'll be discussing more on that a little bit later. Now, it's becoming clear that Mr. Reed doesn't actually have a wife, and the girl starts sensing that not everything is as it seems. Mr. Reed puts their religious values to the test by questioning the Mormons' beliefs and how they felt about polygamy.
That's strange.
As it appears that he's playing a dark and twisted game with them and has no interest in converting to their religion. Now, Sister Barnes and Sister Paxton decide that it's time to vacate the premises by making up a story about being needed back at the church, but only one problem comes up, and that's Mr. Reed has locked the door and they're stuck inside. He offers them an alternative way to leave with the option of two doors that both lead to a cellar, and to me this was almost representing the descent into hell as displayed on Reed's wall with the artwork of Dante's Inferno. As Reed writes belief on one door and disbelief on the other, and the young women must decide which option they want to take. Now this takes us down to the questions about faith and the myth of one true religion. Central to the discussions between Mr. Reed and the sisters is a conversation about faith and the idea of one true religion. Reed's discourse reflects a profound skepticism towards established religions, again preferring to coin his own notion of the one true religion. His insistence on faith being merely an iteration reveals a disquieting blending of cultural references to serve to undermine the significance of doctrinal beliefs. By likening religions to Monopoly, Star Wars, or even the song Creep by Radiohead, Reed deconstructs their sacredness, proposing instead that they are simply products of appropriation and adaptation. As he toys with their faith, Reed exemplifies how rhetoric can manipulate and undermine belief systems, leaving the missionaries vulnerable and questioning. That brings us to choices and consequences in the basement of belief. Now, going back to one of the most pivotal moments in the story with Mr. Reed presenting the sisters with the choice of the two doors. This scenario transcends mere physical escape, but it symbolizes the greater existential decisions facing the sisters. As Sister Paxton's decision to venture towards the door that's marked disbelief to appease Mr. Reed contrasts with Sister Barnes' insistence on holding on to faith and standing their ground. To me, in a way, this dichotomy mirrors the broader struggle between belief and skepticism in our own society today, when faced with tough choices. Now, the doubts start to creep in, but they eventually pick the door belief, as it leads them down a dark path towards a cellar where a creepy woman greets them with blueberry pie. Before meeting this mysterious woman, we see them observing the cellar as Sister Barnes goes towards a cage window and accidentally breaks off a piece of wood with 3 nails hanging off of it, something that comes into handy a little bit later. Now, Mr. Reed tells Barnes and Paxton that this woman is actually a prophet who is capable of miracles. As the woman consumes the pie, she dies, as Reed points out that has actually been poisoned. That brings us to the living prophet and the illusion of miracles. This introduction of the mysterious woman, ostensibly a living prophet capable example of miracles, functions as a critical juncture in the narrative. Now, Mr. Reed's manipulation culminates in the woman's poisoning and subsequent resurrection, a spectacle scripted with the confines of his control. However, this woman's cryptic message towards Mrs. Barnes that it isn't real serves as an important commentary on the nature of miraculous claims within the religious context. Now, at this point, there's a ring at the doorbell and Mr. Reed goes to answer it, as he finds a Mormon elder is looking for the missionaries after they didn't report back. But while he's away, Barnes and Paxton tries to think about other ways to escape and manage to get their hands on some matches as they try to start a fire to create a smoke signals to alert someone that the fact that they are trapped. Now, the sisters have a plan of attack against Mr. Reed, and that is to use a weapon against him, and they have a coded word as well. As Mr. Reed arrives back in the basement, and after some arguing, the plan of attack is put into action as Paxton begins to make her move, but Reed suddenly takes a knife out and cuts Barnes' throat, and we're left to believe that he killed her. Although Mr. Reed claims that this will be another miracle and she will be back just like the supposed prophet. When it appears that this isn't happening, he then cuts into her arm and takes out a piece of metal which he claims proves that Sister Barnes wasn't actually real and that the world is a simulation. He tells Paxton that the only way she can escape the simulation is by taking her own life to test this theory and to see if she is real, and this will take her back to the real world. Yet another example of Mr. Reed putting Paxton's beliefs into question. Now, instead of folding, Paxton recalls that Barnes encouraged him to challenge Mr. Reed as she explains that he had simply switched out the dead women, making use of the doorbell distraction, which he had factored into his plan, which was to get another woman to get rid of the body and take up the same pose before reading the script about what life is like on the other side, which Reed had provided her with. But she went off script with her comments about how it wasn't real, which forced Reed to improvise the simulation part of his plan. Paxton then finds a hatch which leads to another cellar, and she goes down there to discover that there is a room loads of women who look very similar to the prophet and are all being kept in cages. Now, it's safe to assume that these were women Reed tricked throughout the years and used them as test subjects for his discovery of the one true religion. The simulated truth, the revelation of control. As Sister Paxton's investigation and subsequent discoveries unfold, she unravels Mr. Reed's intricate web of control, culminating in the revelation that her existence and potentially her beliefs have been orchestrated. To me, the discovery of the caged women represents the extent of Reed's manipulation, not just faith, but human agency itself. Here we explore how control as the one true religion is manifested in various forms, and how it resonates with historical and contemporary discussions of religious authority and autonomy. This lesson is to prove that he can control anyone in the same way that all religious institutions can do in his eyes. The climax, stabbed faith and final acts of agency. As the narrative reaches its crescendo with violent confrontation, as he continues to explain this, Paxton then stabs him with the letter opener and runs back to the previous basement. But while she checks on seamlessly dead Barnes, the wounded Mr. Reed reappears and stabs her in the stomach, as she falls to the ground and starts praying as Reed crawls towards her, seamlessly to split her throat and kill her. But just as he's about to strike, he suddenly gets hit on the back of the head and falls over dead, as it is revealed that Sister Barnes isn't dead quite yet, saving Paxton with her final act before she falls over and dies. Now, going back to that moment, this act of defiance emphasizes the struggle for agency, as her sacrifice embodies ultimate resistance against Reed's control. Simultaneously, Paxton's ability to stab Reed demotes the reclamation of agency, a desperate assertion of self amidst chaos. This climax serves as a potent commentary on the moral implications of belief and the lengths individuals will go to preserve their integrity in moments of existential threat. As Paxton returns to Mr. Reed's study and manages to make an escape through a window to find that outside is now covered in snow, with the final scene calling back to the beginning with Paxton's comments about butterflies, we end with the butterfly landing on her hand. Now, this ending can be viewed many ways, but let's consider two different options. Now, unlike Mr. Reed, the film doesn't make any definitive statements about faith, but one of reading the final moments can certainly be read as a miracle, with Barnes managing to hang on to life just long enough to save her friend. Now, I personally don't believe this to be true because there's no way Barnes would have managed to live that long without bleeding out. Which leads us to option number 2, which is Paxton actually did get killed by Mr. Reed. And what we see is the end of her simply entering the afterlife. Going back to the importance of the butterfly at the start of this film, and even towards the end with Mr. Reed discussing the butterfly dream by the ancient Chinese philosopher. Now the basic concept being that a man fallen asleep one day and dreamt that he was a butterfly. When he woke up, he did not know whether he really was a man who dreamt about a butterfly or whether he was a butterfly now dreaming that he was a man. Now when we see Sister Paxton outside, we notice that she looks at her cell phone, which still has no bars, even though she was outside of the house, which blocked the signal. Also pointing out that there's now snow covered on the ground, which you'll remember was mentioned earlier, representing the clouds that the prophet had spoken, and Barnes' reappearance basically representing the angel mentioned as well. Now the snow can symbolize both purity and isolation, and the presence of the butterfly can also represent themes of transformation and hope amidst despair. It implies a delicate balance of new beginnings and fragility of life, resonating with the uncertainty of faith. Now, just like faith, it's up to the individual viewer to find the interpretation that makes the most sense to them. Which brings us to one of my final points, which is the interpretation of the ending, reality versus the afterlife. The story's ambiguous conclusion can leave the viewers questioning whether Paxton's escape is the return of reality or a manifestation of the afterlife scenario. Again, the imagery of snow and the butterfly can be interpreted through various lenses, possibly representing rebirth, redemption, or transient nature of existence itself. Now, before wrapping up, I found these interviews from Mr. Reed himself describing how the ending was filmed. Talking to Gamers Radar, Hugh Grant said the following: "There's a moment where I crawl across the floor to her having been stabbed, which I did in two ways. One where he's still trying to make the whole thing fun, as he's been trying to make the whole evening fun. He's kind of going, look at this is fun, dying. And then I did another one where all his defenses have gone and he's absolutely shitting himself and he's going to die. Very frightened. He wants some comfort and wants her to comfort him, perhaps with a prayer." Hugh Grant also added, "I'm not entirely clear the way they edited it, which of those two performances they're going for. I think it's the latter, but I know they telescoped the last 20 minutes quite a lot. The film was running long, so maybe it was not quite clear. I quite like the second way, as finally after an hour and a half of this guy totally being in control, he's a frightened rabbit." As we wrap up with my final thoughts on the enduring question of faith and the controlled conclusion. My thoughts on the one true religion serves not merely as a critique of religious beliefs, but as a broader examination of the nature of human control, belief systems, and the constructs of reality. Through Mr. Reed's psychological manipulation of Sister Barnes and Sister Paxton, the narrative reveals the intricate dynamics between faith, freedom, and control, a conversation that resonates deeply within contemporary society. By leaving the audience with the unsolved questions about agency and belief, the story encourages ongoing contemplation of what constitutes reality, the nature of faith, and the inherent human desire of autonomy. Through the lens of this unsettling narrative, we are confronted not just with the perils of manipulation masked as philosophical inquiry, but also the broader implications of coercive belief systems and the inherent complexities of faith. The tale ultimately does not render religious beliefs as unequivocally good or bad. Instead, it portrays a spectrum filled with contradictions, urging us to question the very nature of truth and the means by which it is conveyed. It invites reflection on how easily faith can be ensnared by the illusory and how the search for understanding can lead us into the depths of darkness, even as we reach for the light of belief. Now that's going to be the end of my Heretic discussion and ending explained. I really appreciate you all making it to this point in the video, and I would love to hear your thoughts about the film, from your biggest takeaways, your deeper meanings, and how you all interpreted the ending. If you want to hear more of my thoughts about the film, click the video link on the screen now, and check out my other videos as well. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into powerful storytelling and cinema. You all are awesome, stay safe, and I'll catch you all on the next video.